Welcome back to SnowRunner, guys, and today we are currently looking at two Cateye Chevrolets that are very similar looking on the surface, but there's actually one incredible difference between both of these trucks. Now, the red one is very much so a crawling dedicated build. Both of these trucks have very flexible suspensions, and both of these trucks are extremely capable off-road. However, the blue one has a feature that basically nothing else in this game has. Now, this has been done in the real world before, but it's still a very, very rare thing, and what I'm talking about is a swivel chassis. So essentially, with the red Cateye, you have the flex of the suspension, which is really, really good and really, really capable. However, that's where the flexibility stops. Now, in the blue one, you have the flexibility of the suspension and the travel of the entire suspension itself, but you also have a swiveling center section in the middle of the chassis. And I'll show you guys what I mean by that momentarily. Now, let's go ahead and get out of free camera, and we will jump into the red one first, and I'm going to drive it up onto the flex ramp. So let's fire it up. Now, these trucks are both running no damage suspensions, as well as a couple of different tires, but really at the end of the day, performance-wise, they are about the same. They're running no damage suspensions both. They're also running the same transmission and the same engine. So if I go ahead and drive this guy right up the side of the flex ramp, you'll see that the flex is quite good, honestly. It's amazing for a full-size platform, it's amazing for a full-size truck, and it would definitely be able to hold up to just about any trail you might throw at it. Let's go a little bit higher and see if that's about, yeah, that's about as good as it gets with this one. Now, once again, though, looking at that, that is a ton of flex for a full-size truck. So let's go ahead and shut this thing down now and make sure that the handbrake is, whoop, never mind. Make sure that the handbrake is on. Now we're going to jump into the other one so you guys can see what this actually does when you put it to use. Now I'm going to fire this thing up, and you may be able to see some movement in between the bed and the cab right as you set off, and that's completely and totally normal. That's completely and totally understandable considering what this thing is able to do. But once we drive up onto this flex ramp, you'll realize why this makes a difference. So let me go ahead and align it with the flex ramp. Easy does it. All right, let me make sure we're good to go. And now you can see that we're basically all the way up the flex ramp, and there's still more to go. Look at that. The difference between the flexibility range of both of these trucks is absolutely enormous once you factor in the ability of the bed to swivel. Now, obviously, it's not just the bed, it's that entire section of the frame, and when you look at it up close, it's not necessarily like, it's so weird because it actually does separate right there. There is a genuine separation between the front half of the frame and the rear half of the frame, and I have never seen anything that does really anything like it before. And when you look at it right here like this, it almost looks broken, and you have to remind yourself that that's what it's designed to do. You have to remind yourself that when you see this cab section not lining up with the bed section, you're like, oh, wait, he designed it to do that, and that's okay. Now, God, looking at that right there, the actual flexibility range, you would swear that if that wasn't you know, a dedicated swivel truck, you would swear that that was basically a pro-level crawler. But now, since we're out on TNB trails, I want to see what this thing is actually like in the swivel configuration once you take it out onto some, you know, some genuinely tricky stuff, some genuinely hard terrain. So let's make our way down to the road. And I'm very interested also to see just how it drives, kind of in a general sense, because handling-wise, it is a little like, I wouldn't call it sloppy, but I would call it a little bit strange, a little bit, you know, like something to get used to. Now, I do believe that all-wheel drive and diff lock are always on in this thing. Yes, they are. I just wanted to go ahead and make sure of that because we are using immersive mode, which turns the entire HUD off as far as when you're not using any of the functions of it. But if I were to stop and press up on the D-pad, it would still bring up all of the functionality of the HUD, just in case I wanted to check in on something. And also, if I needed more clearance, I could still raise the suspension up in conjunction with also having that swivel bed. So we're going to have the suspension in high mode for this, and we're going to head down a trail. Now, normally I would head down this one, but I don't necessarily feel as though that one is going to be a full-on test of what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go a little bit further down the trail, or not necessarily down the trail, but down this road to get to another trail. Now, some of you guys may know exactly where I'm going, and for those of you that know exactly where I'm going, you've probably spent a lot of time out here on TNB trails, and in terms of the trail that we're going to, I think it really will highlight the flexibility of not only the suspension and the swivel chassis, but it's going to throw this thing into a challenging rock crawling environment right from the get-go. Now, let me know in the comment section down below if swivel chassis are something that you have seen before, maybe something that you have seen in real life. I do remember that there was at one point a Dodge Power Wagon, an old school Dodge Power Wagon that I remember reading about a long time ago that was built with a swivel chassis, and I'm sure there are other swivel chassis trucks out there, but that's the one that when I think about real world swivel chassis trucks, that's the one that comes to my mind. So let me go ahead and make my way up this trail now. Now, this is going to be interesting taking this on in automatic mode because this is going to basically make it have to think on its own and decide which gear to position itself in. So let's see how it does getting around this first corner. And I want to know exactly where this comes into, how it comes into play with the swivel chassis. So easy does it. Oh, that's interesting. It's almost like the suspension is reaching out for the rocks. It's so weird. It really is. And when I say weird, I don't necessarily mean weird in a bad way. I mean weird in the way of I'm not used to seeing something do this. And I don't think a lot of people are used to seeing something do this. Man, those lights are pretty, though. They're absolutely gorgeous. Ease it up and over the rocks. These BFGs have a lot of grip, an absolute ton of it. The approach angle on this thing isn't bad either. Now, you may be saying that the tires aren't necessarily gigantic, and you'd be right on that. I mean, in the grand scheme of SnowRunner crawlers, these are, I believe, kind of a 40 to 42, and while that is big by real-world standards, it's not necessarily going to, it's not necessarily going to be mind-blowing in the realm of SnowRunner crawlers, but I think it really does a great job of putting those tires and that tire size to use. And actually, God, I love looking at that that animated steering setup. That's so gorgeous. My brain is not used to watching that bed move independently of the cab. It's so odd to me. Oh, the truck is gonna have, it's gonna have issues here. That was entirely my bad, though. I got it caught on the inside of that rock. And yeah, that section is very tricky, especially for longer wheelbase vehicles, because when you're coming down that hill, if you get your front axle caught in there, no matter how much you try to drive forward, all it's going to do is walk the rear end around and eventually put you in a position where your truck is going to want to flip over. But let's see about getting through here. Now, this is an area where I figure the swivel chassis may come into play because it's a little bit of an awkward angle, and it does actually do a good job of keeping the truck more level. I can actually really... Whoa! Honestly, I feel like it saved me from flipping over right there. I really do. Let me go ahead and reorient my truck. Make my way forward again. I went a little too far. Little too far. Just really trying to play with the limits of this thing, and I think, we've definitely found the limits of where it flips over. I just want to kind of now get a little bit more accustomed to, how to use those limits to my advantage on the trails like this one. Ease it up around the corner. It definitely likes to be locked in a lower gear. Come on. But it also sometimes needs the wheel speed, so that's why being in automatic mode does help sometimes, because if you bump the clutch and you're on the throttle, it'll change up to like second or third gear and give you that little bit of extra torque to kind of pop up over an obstacle. It is so satisfying, though, to watch the suspension work in conjunction with that swivel bed. Or rather, swivel chassis, because it's funny, because the more I thought about it just then, what I said, I was like, it's not just the bed that's swiveling, it's the whole truck. And I feel like to say it's a swivel bed is almost like selling the truck short. It's the whole thing is swiveling in the middle, not just the bed. Easy does it a little bit further up the trail. And now if we get a little bit of a good flex shot of what the truck is doing, there you can see the separation again. Once again, such a odd and yet very unique feature to see in the game, and especially to see in action on the trails. Now, let's go and grab the non-swivel variant now, because the non-swivel variant, I feel like, will be really interesting to compare and really interesting to see what it does in relation to how the swivel bed variant did on that particular trail. Let's go into first-person view. God, that hood stack is so satisfying to see in first-person view. We got the Sparko wheel, we got beans, and we got the hood stack. Yo, this thing is, like, extremely satisfying to drive. It definitely feels a lot more, it's almost like it feels a little bit more when you're driving down a dirt road or something like that, especially at faster pace. It feels more planted to drive, especially if you're trying to drive it a little bit faster. But that honestly makes sense. I mean, the swivel chassis truck is inherently going to feel kind of loose, and I think, you know, the only thing that would push that swivel chassis truck over the top in my mind, and I don't even know if this is possible really, but the only thing that would really push it over the top would be to, like, be able to lock and unlock the chassis in advanced features when you wanted to. And let me go ahead and make sure right off the bat that that's not something you can do. Okay, so it doesn't look like that's something you could do. The only advanced option I see is to change the suspension mode, and I don't think the option to actually lock the center of the chassis is actually there. If it is, I mean, that would be absolutely, like, wild and incredible. But it doesn't look right now like that's an option, but that would be a wild option later on down the road. I mean, but at the end of the day, if you did that, I mean, you pretty much would not need this variant of the truck. I mean, that would pretty much render this variant of the truck, like, basically just a standard Cateye at that point. All right, let's go. We'll do the first section in automatic mode in this one, too, because I really do want to see back-to-back and compare how they perform with and without that swivel chassis. So let's see, up and over the first obstacle. You can tell right off the bat that the suspension has to do more work. And not only does the suspension have to do more work, but there's a little bit less compliance there in the way the truck can settle down into the terrain. Let's drop it over the next edge. It's still a very satisfying truck to drive on the trail, though. I do really enjoy driving these full-size trail rigs because, once again, you know, something like this is not out of the norm for what you would see, you know, at maybe like a full-size trail ride event, like out in Moab or something like that. Solid axle swap Duramaxes are beasts on the trail, if they're set up right, of course. Let's go. That was my bad. All right, now this is where I almost flipped over before, and I think I'm going to take a slightly alternate line just to kind of set myself up a tiny bit better. Yeah, that's the line I should have taken when I was here in the blue truck earlier. Oh, there we go. Not bad. It's going to scrape the rockers right there, and honestly, if it was a real-life rig, I would absolutely have rock sliders on it before doing a trail system like this. But, you know, it's SnowRunner, and we don't necessarily care about rocker damage in SnowRunner. We already got some bumper damage. I'm surprised we have bumper damage and not rocker damage, to be honest. But, wow, that actually got through there extremely easily. Like, a lot easier than I thought it would. Let's make our way around this corner real quick. It's almost like it's so weird because I'm not going to say that it's better. It's just different, you know? It's a very different experience than driving the swivel chassis, and I almost wonder if, because of the fact that I don't have much experience in the swivel chassis truck, and this feels more like the trucks I'm used to driving, I feel like that might be why I'm more comfortable on the trails in this truck right now. But I think, you know, the more I drive that swivel chassis truck, the more comfortable I'll become on the trails in it, especially on the more challenging trails. Now, let me go ahead and ease this thing up next to it so we can get a good shot of them side by side, and really at the end of the day, I do, oh, look at that flex. You've actually got them both side by side like that. That's so cool. Now, at the end of the day, I do love both of these builds. I think they're actually really interesting in the way that, like, the red Cateye does a great job of just being like a really great crawler, and it really does push that, you know, push the envelope of quality. Whereas the swivel chassis truck, you know, while it does all the same things as the red Cateye, it also basically adds into effect the swivel chassis dynamic, which takes it to a whole nother level. Now, if you guys enjoyed this video taking a look at these trucks, make sure to let me know any and all of your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. And if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe and turn those notifications on, and I will see y'all next time. Talk to y'all later.